Hello. Our keynote speaker needs no introduction. She wears many hats, and she has accomplished so much. She is a distinguished member of the technical staff of Lawrence Livermore National Lab. She is an adjunct professor at UC Merced, and she is a PI of UC Berkeley. She leads multiple team projects for United States Department of Energy, but more recently, she led the multidisciplinary team that created the Roads to Removal report. This is a national scale assessment of carbon dioxide removal, and this is the first economy-wide high-resolution county-by-county technical evaluation of the existing options for achieving carbon removal. Reading through this report, what impressed me the most is that her team demonstrated that we can achieve 1 billion tons of CO2 removal from the atmosphere, not only technically, but also we can do this affordably. So please join me and welcome Dr. Jennifer Pett-Ridge.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for including our team and our enthusiasm in this event. I'm here to share with you the results that we published just a couple months ago in the report that you just heard described, Roads to Removal. So if we can bring up the slides. This is, as you just heard, an analysis of carbon dioxide removal. And the team that put this together is really enormous, 70 folks, so I'm afraid I'm not going to list all of their names, but several of my colleagues are here in the room. And what they did is really extraordinary, and I think it's really relevant to the conversation that we're going to have today. So I'll just make sure that I can advance here. There we go. I want to start by essentially framing what is the concern? What are we doing with carbon dioxide removal, with carbon management in general? What's the demand? And it simply is, we have a climate that is changing in really a dramatically and frightening way. Now, it's not fun to have to start with the negative, but the reality is that even locally here in Bakersfield, we're looking at temperature rises that are just not humanly sustainable, much less comfortable in the next essentially 50 years. Looking at rise of something like 6 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're looking at increased fire risk that is happening right here. You know it. I'm sure you breathe that smoke. You are seeing the risk to people's homes, their livelihoods. I could go on, but what I really want to focus on is the opportunity that is also local for addressing climate change, which I think it's easy to think of as a global problem, but the solutions are right here. And I hope that that's partly, at least, why you're attending. So what I'm showing you in these photos are just two of the approaches that I'll kind of delve into as I go through the results of the report. My goal is to not only tell you the national picture, but give you little snippets of what the opportunity here is in California, in the Central Valley, and to the extent I can, right here in Kern County. So let me just make sure we're on the same page about why we even need carbon dioxide removal. Because the main thing that I think we all understand is that we simply need to reduce our emissions of climate warming gases, CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, that are coming from our use of fossil fuel, that are coming from our agricultural sector, that are coming from many of our important industries. That is hard, hard work, and it's 90% of the solution of getting us to net zero, or essentially decreasing the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. We know that we can't decarbonize every industry, certainly on the timescale that we're looking at, trying to get to net zero by 2050. There are some real tough nuts to crack. Sustainable airline fuel, making steel, making cement. We will likely continue to use fossil fuels to do some of these activities. So we need to make up for that, and that's where carbon dioxide removal enters the picture. We need to make up for the difference in what we'll be able to achieve with decarbonization. Now, what the IPCC and the Biden administration published just several years ago is that we need to ideally achieve 1 billion tons of removal by the year 2050. And I'd say let's start even before then. So the question is, can we do it? That's really what we set out to achieve with this report. Can we achieve that 1 billion tons, that gigaton number? Why did we come to this? Well, you may be aware that back in 2019, our team at Lawrence Livermore with colleagues published a report we called Getting to Neutral. It was focused just here on the state, asking a very similar question. Can we achieve the state's goals of being at net zero by 2045? And we showed yes, and we showed what it's going to cost and how we can get there. And I would hazard that that's had a lot of influence. I hope that you've looked at it. If you haven't, then look it up. But it's had influence in Sacramento and in many industries across the state. We felt that was important to do at the national scale. So that's what led us to produce Roads to Removal. This report came from experts all across the country. Experts in agriculture and economics, in carbon management, in geologic storage, biomass conversion. I can't go into all of those details, but the neat thing about this report is, number one, it's county-level data. And all of that data is available to you. It's loaded up on a wonderful website that the Livermore Lab Foundation and Climate Now helped us produce, roads2removal.org. You can go and look at these interactive maps and scroll over wherever you came from and look at what the opportunity is in terms of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. The other really neat thing about this report is its cross-cutting nature. Anytime we advocated for a new industry like biomass conversion or direct air capture, we felt it was important to fuel that with renewable energy, with either solar or geothermal or wind energy. So we looked at the cross-cut of where we have the opportunity to do those two things in the same place, and then do geologic storage, ideally without having to use a pipeline to transport CO2 long distances. Because we all know that costs money, and there are issues that our environmental justice communities are concerned about with long-distance transport. So we tried to take all of those factors in together. Let me make sure that we're on the same page about the different topics that we covered in this report. We're starting with CO2 in our atmosphere. We want to look at the net removal of it from the atmosphere. These are not offsets. This is literally vacuuming it out of the sky. And who's best at doing that? Well, I like to make the joke that the plants are the original OG of carbon dioxide removal. Photosynthesis takes CO2 out of our atmosphere and stores it in the biomass of plants. That biomass can contribute also to carbon that gets stored below ground. So we can both have carbon stored in our forests, in the boles of those trees, but also push down into the ground via roots of different species of plants, particularly ones that have very deep roots. So those are two what we call sometimes natural solutions for carbon dioxide removal. But all of that biomass, which might not look like a living plant anymore, it might be residue on an ag field, or it might be what's in your compost bin, or it might be some of the wood waste that we need to remove from our forests for fire mitigation. All of that biomass, an enormous millions of tons in the United States, can be moved to a facility, a kind of biorefinery, where we convert it to a fuel at the same time that we're doing carbon capture. And if we put the carbon capture step first, if we try to optimize that activity, we call that biomass carbon removal and then storage, because we put the CO2 below ground. And we have an acronym, because, you know, scientists, we like acronyms. We call that BIKERS. You've probably heard the term BECS. Bikers is a close cousin. What it does that's a little different is, it puts that CO2 removal first. But we often make a useful product, hydrogen, biogas. It could be sustainable airline fuel. It could be products that go into making asphalt. But those products and selling those products often offset the cost of the process. Now, last in our description of different CDR approaches is direct air capture, or DACS. Direct air capture is literally vacuuming CO2 out of the sky. We're no longer talking about plants here. We're talking about a facility, a different kind of plant, I guess. And in those, we're using a solvent or sorbent chemistry to literally remove CO2. But again, that CO2 is going to be captured. It's going to be stored durably deep underground. So those are the approaches that we looked at in our report. There's a lot that's not in the report because we only looked at things that we felt were mature technologies or could be mature by the year 2050. So there's a lot of what we call roads not traveled. Neat things like enhanced rock weathering, marine carbon capture. We didn't really look deeply at bio-oil. We didn't look at biochar. There's a lot that we didn't include. But even though we found there's an enormous opportunity for carbon dioxide removal. And with all of those roads not traveled, I am confident that in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll have even more options than just the 4 that we analyzed. We chose these 4 because the data already existed. This is a bottom-up analysis. We did modeling, but this is not an integrated assessment model like you probably mostly see results from. We looked at where is the actual data, again, at county level. So here's the answer. We absolutely can achieve 1 billion tons of removals by the year 2050. And we can do that at a cost of $129 billion, so roughly $130 a ton. Now, I'm going to challenge you as you look at that number and you're thinking, oh, that's a big number, or that's a little number. Whatever you're thinking, what other commodity can you buy for $130 a ton? Sand, maybe rock, not much. So I'd say you're getting a good deal here. And I think that the nation is getting a good deal because nationally and globally, the amount that we're spending on mitigating the risks and the direct effects of climate change are in the billions and approaching trillions. And that's to human health, that's loss of property, to hurricanes and fires. I could go on. But the numbers that we're seeing are astronomical and only headed up. So these numbers, I think, actually are dwarfed in comparison. The other really neat thing is we've calculated something on the order of 440,000 new jobs coming from the new industries that this enterprise will create. So I'm really excited, not just that we can achieve that goal that the IPCC and the Biden administration has set, but the real financial and human opportunities that are coming with this. We need to act now, though, because what our analysis shows is it's going to take time to build those facilities. The Bikers and DACS facilities, you probably know better than I do that those can cost millions, many millions of dollars. And it takes time to get that investment, to get the permits, to get all of the stars aligned. But what we can start right away is forest management, agricultural management, and I'll show you some of the details, but the techniques that are involved there are things we know how to do today. So while the durability of that carbon is not as long-lived as putting carbon in a geologic storage location, the opportunity is important for our climate system even to remove small amounts in the near term. And so what I would encourage is we need to start on what we can do and what we can affordably do in terms of managing our agricultural lands and forests while we transition towards these more technological solutions in biomass and direct air capture. This is a supply curve. There's a lot of information here. Mostly what I want to tell you is in green. Below, we can actually make money by managing forests. And what you're seeing along the bottom axis there is the millions of tons of CO2 that can be removed. We scaled it up to 1 billion, a gigaton. In yellow, what we can do in our agricultural sector, and I think it's impressive that both the green and the yellow, they're tens of dollars per ton. It's really quite affordable. But then the big purple chunk in the middle of this graph, that's all biomass, all kinds of different ways of converting biomass and capturing CO2. What's probably the biggest opportunity is converting it to hydrogen, gasification. Also, conversion to sustainable airline fuel. The Department of Energy made sure that we included that in our analysis, and you understand why. I get on a plane pretty often, I have to admit, and we need to be able to continue that to support our many industries. So the costs depend on the type of conversion, where the biomass is coming from, but overall we've got somewhere between 600 and 800 million tons of removals possible per year at approximately $100, a little more, a little less, depending on the pathway. Make up the rest. To get all the way to 1 billion tons, we're going to have to do direct air capture. And what I'm not showing you on this graph, it could go way off to the right, is we could do a lot of direct air capture, 9 billion tons per year, under approximately $200 a ton. So that's a decision if we're going to do that, because it takes a lot of energy to fuel that many DAC plants. We think the nearer term, cheaper opportunities are, as I present here, in our forests and our biomass management. So I'll quickly go through some of the actual details. I want to again remind you that all of this information, the entire report, can be downloaded at roads2removal.org. I'm going to start with the agricultural sector, which I know is really important here in Kern County. We looked at three methodologies that are already well known to farmers, and that's planting cover crops. That can be done in our orchards and also in the wintertime in our crop fields. And also planting more perennials. These are plants that live year on year, which are not living and dying each year. Just putting a border around the edge of a field of a perennial that might be good for both wind and erosion abatement can make a big difference in putting more carbon in the ground. And here in Kern County, estimate something on the order of 0.6 million tons of CO2 cumulative can be removed between now and 2050 at a really affordable price, $15 a ton, with all kinds of other benefits, better water holding, less erosion. So that's something, again, we can do now. In our forests, we can do an enormous amount in the northern part of the state and particularly also in the Sierras. Across the country, we looked at both management of forests as well as planting new forests with high rotation. That's something you do in the southeast US where you got lots of water, it's nice and warm, good soils. Out here in the West, it's not so much about planting new forests, it's about managing the ones we have so they don't burn. That's pretty obvious, right? Actually, removing biomass from our forests helps them grow better. It's a little counterintuitive, but that helps our forests remain healthy and protect the carbon that they've already got. That biomass that we take out of the forest, I want to focus on that because that's part of our biomass conversion process that's so important to understand the value of that mass, that organic material that we remove from our forests, or if we take it from municipal waste or our ag fields, it has so much more worth for its carbon than for its electrons, what you get if you burn it. And that's the opportunity that we see, and again, this technique we call bikers. It's spread across the state in lots of different types of biomass options. Just to make it really clear, we're talking about forest residues here, agricultural residues, carbon crops, which again are not a big thing here in California, but elsewhere in the country we're talking about growing miscanthus, switchgrass, oil cane, sorghum, crops that we would harvest simply for their carbon storage potential. And then finally, what we produce out of our own kitchens, our municipal wastes. And all of that together, that biomass could be converted and again, make many, many hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 removals at a really affordable price. Now, bikers is a complicated topic because there's really many, many ways to think about the conversion, to think about the techno-economic analysis of this approach. What we really see as the biggest opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, is conversion to hydrogen, gasification. Also, production of biochar is important. Production of what we call mass timber, new kinds of lumber, where you've got wood waste that's chipped and pressed together, and it actually can last for 100 to 200 years if you're using that in housing. We can also make bio-oil. There are lots of things we can make, and many of these things have a good price on the market. So it's a really interesting place to study, but it's, again, I recognize it's complex because there's so many different avenues. Focusing here in California in the Central Valley, we've got a huge amount of biomass, 10 million tons. And we estimate that that could be creating 16 million tons of CO2 removals, again, at a really affordable price point. Here in Kern County, a lot of that coming from ag residues. I think it's about the third highest county in the state for production of biomass that previously would have been burned. Now, where are we going to process that material? Well, these facilities, for the most part, do not yet exist. So that's an opportunity. It's also a big challenge to find the financing to produce all of these. That we think that we need something on the order of 300 new biorefineries across the nation. That's a lot, and I recognize that. But again, there's a big opportunity, and there's money to be made in both storing that CO2 and the products that we get out of the conversion. So last, I want to talk about direct air capture. I think that's going to be a topic that's quite familiar here. Kern County's been very successful in attracting federal dollars for pilots. If you're not familiar with direct air capture, it's essentially using, again, biochemistry, organic chemistry of solvents or sorbents that are using great big fans to pull CO2 in, and as that CO2 is captured, we then have usually a heating process which desorbs the CO2. That's a simple way to think about it. Now that heat needs to, in our view, come from renewable energy for us to be in a net negative space. And so that's where we got to have either a dedicated solar or wind or geothermal plant, ideally right next door. Direct air capture can remove an enormous amount at the national scale. But if we want to restrict it to only places where we have that land available for the renewable energy and we got the right kind of climate and water conditions, you can see here the opportunities really in the Intermountain West. We're unlikely to be doing a lot of DAC in the Northeast, even in the Southeast. But the area around the Gulf Coast and here in California are also good options and good priority regions. So here's the state picture, and you can see it's really clustered in the Central Valley. The reason for that, the land prices are slightly cheaper, though still expensive, but we've got the geologic storage, and we don't have to transport that supercritical CO2 very far before we're injecting it below ground. Lots of opportunities. California's leading the nation. A lot of new funding coming into this space. As you probably know, this area in Kern has got 2 LEAP grants from the DOE and 3 of these DAC grants for pilot plants. So that's really, really exciting. Yeah, probably the reason several of you are here today. Now, I think you probably know this too, because there's been a lot of extraction that's gone on in this county for decades. That means you have an enormous opportunity and the know-how and the workforce for injecting CO2 below ground. So we looked across the country at where we have basins that can absorb that in saline basins and in basalt aquifers. And we looked not just at the sort of 2D, where's the opportunity, but what's the volume? How much the millions of tons that can actually be safely stored a mile down. And if you don't know this space, we tried to draw it, so not quite to scale. That would be hard on a single page. But we're talking about storing CO2 in tiny, tiny, really microscopic interstitial grains, between the grains in a sand aquifer and in basalt formations. And that storage has been studied for decades. It has been practiced already in 25 locations around the globe for many decades. So while there are concerns about seismicity, about concerns about leaks, this is really a tried and true approach. And I think what we need to do is start to really help communicate that message about the real opportunity but security of this kind of storage, because this is really this is forever storage. This is not putting carbon in trees or in soils. As good as that is, this is going to last. In Kern, excuse me for the typo, that should say class 6. I took a lot of Latin, but apparently my Roman numerals are not very good. You know that class 6 wells are the most important kind of breakthrough step at the beginning here, getting those approvals to be able to do the injection below ground. In Kern, you got 5 of those projects in the work, and I know that they're, I looked at the EPA tracker just recently, and they're very close, if not already approved. So lots of opportunities here locally. Now, I'll start to wrap up here by just saying, I mentioned earlier that we did a cross-cutting analysis, and I told you early, when we looked at DAC that we thought about where we have access to renewable energy. But we also felt it was important to think about environmental justice, equity, energy justice. Who's being affected by these industries? Who stands to gain? Who stands to lose? How does the environment be affected? Are we going to get cleaner water? Are we going to get poorer air quality? How are all of those factors going to be affected by all of these new industries? And so my colleague Kim Mayfield and her team looked at 26 different indices that really span the gamut. I can't go into all of them, but I'm just going to show you 3 here. One is social vulnerability, essentially people's take-home pay, their health, soil erosion, that's probably more important in the center of the country, and PFAS. These are these forever chemicals that get into our air and our water. And we know that with burning of biomass, a lot of it loaded with these PFAS chemicals, we really loft a lot of that into the air. So if we took that biomass and instead of burning it, we gasified it, we really have the opportunity to produce a value stream that is improving our air quality, which again, I know is important here in Kern. We also have a huge opportunity for new jobs. So, just want to emphasize again, this is county-level resolution data. It means that we're able to look at not just what's the one-size-fits-all opportunity for the whole United States, but regionally, what should folks focus on? What do we think are the real options? And you can see just by the colors, if you don't even have to look at the decals, that the opportunities in the Midwest and the Northeast are different than they are here in California and the Pacific Northwest. In California, huge opportunities to remove forest biomass, and that's going to mitigate a lot of our fire risks. That biomass can be used for conversion to fuels that we need for transportation and to run our industries. In the Central Valley, biomass more from the ag sector, but also opportunities in geologic storage that comes from either bikers or direct air capture. And we got our cities producing a ton, really many millions of tons, really, of the municipal solid waste. How about we stop trucking that to landfills? How about we use that waste and put it to good use? And finally, in our forests, again, as a county that stretches off to the east and you know the fire risks, the opportunity to take biomass out of our forests to reduce those risks, improve our air quality, and again, convert it into useful fuels and CO2 that we can durably store. So lots of opportunities here. I hope that you're walking away from this talk mentally, at least, with a real enthusiasm, particularly about the opportunity here in the southern San Joaquin Valley. And I think the thing I want to sort of put out as a challenge to you is you're a step ahead. You're a step ahead because of your natural resources, because of your decades of expertise in the fossil energy industries and how to actually make these wells safe and maintain them over time. But with that step ahead comes a responsibility to do this safely, to bring our surrounding communities along, to make sure that good jobs, sustainable jobs, are created into the future, and that we remove CO2 at a massive scale. Because as I started, that's what our climate needs, and I think that's what you can deliver. So thanks to my team that helped write the report. Thank you for listening, and our funders, and I'm happy to answer a question if we have time. We may not, I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, and we have a few minutes for some questions. If you need the mic, please raise your hand. I will deliver it to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the very thoughtful presentation. Rob Trouts with EPRI. I had a question about the analysis. It doesn't appear to look at the end cost to the consumer. For example, bikers can be a very expensive technology to use in terms of electric generation compared to, let's say, a natural gas combined cycle plant, which has high efficiency, and also you can put CCS on the back end of it. So is there a plan to do an analysis similar to what EPRI has done with Regen and or MIT has done in looking at the end cost to the consumer and the different pathways that could be taken to minimize those costs?
Yeah, I think that's really where we get into what, not just what the acronym BIKERS means, but what it fundamentally stands for. And what it stands for is putting that CO2 removal first. Yes, we produce energy, but comparing it to traditional energy generation, we think it's not a false equivalency, but we want to make sure that we value the CO2 removal. Right now, that's hard to do in this country. We've got a 45Q credit, but we actually probably should value it even higher because the benefit to our climate system is enormous when we start removing CO2 at scale. So we really think of the energy generation as, the word incidental is coming to mind, and that's trivializing it, and I don't want to, but it's a secondary product of the process, the first being the CO2 removal. So while I agree with you, absolutely one could go deeper on in terms of the economics, I think, again, it's important that we start to really value that first part, the CO2 removal. And I will also just say the techno-economic analysis that we did for the bikers does go all the way to the cost of the product, whether that's hydrogen or bio-oil or electrons if we're selling energy. But there are pieces that we did not factor in the cost of building a facility, and that's the big expense. Actually, once you're running the facility, it's not particularly more expensive than many others.
We have a few minutes for more questions. Please raise your hand. I'll deliver the microphone to you.
All right, everybody's
All
on
right.
board. Thank you.